What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an abusive prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week. Threw me in a pool when I was small and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid and your own mother doesn't give mess how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said go ahead tough guy, hit me as hard as you can right in the gut thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment and I knew it. He was a small man, 5 feet 6 inches. I was at least as tall as him already. And as he gave me his mess-eating grin, I pulled my fist back and freaking belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was freaking pissed. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. You told him to do it. If you weren't ready it's your fault, not his. One of the most satisfying moments of my life. And one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. Not sure if it fits, but during an insanely busy weekend before Christmas, a Karen was complaining to every associate about how messy our store was. The manager had relieved the girl at the fitting room and was helping to hang stuff. Karen pulled her crap and was trying to make a point that we were messy and a horrible place to shop. This manager told her roughly, "Ma'am, we're messy at the moment because we're a popular store. And the biggest reason we're messy is because of women like you who can't be bothered to pick up after themselves. It's not the associates making the mess. It's people like you. Your type have us outnumbered." First time I actually witnessed someone deflate. Probably watching a few Texas DPS officers realize they couldn't shut down a whole airport. I was working as a flight instructor at small airport on a Saturday afternoon. We had one plane that had an issue on takeoff and veered off the runway. It cartwheeled and totaled the airplane, but fortunately the pilot was not seriously injured. I had a student who was next in line for takeoff when it happened. He called me from his phone as it happened. I hopped in the airport car with one of the rampers and drove out to the plane with a radio to inform inbound planes to use the other runway. We had no control tower. On the way to the runway I called the airport manager who drove to the airport, and on his way he made a phone call to officially close that runway. About 30 minutes later a metric fuckton of DPS officers showed up and immediately tried to close the whole airport, treating it like a giant crime scene. They were carelessly driving around the airport like they owned the place, ignoring the planes that were moving around and crossing our only open runway without regard to inbound traffic. A mechanic and I tried to tell them to be careful and they got mad at us. One of them told me they were locking it down a couple times, meaning the whole airport. Now I was a broke ass flight instructor and I had a flight that afternoon that was ultimately going to help pay for me to eat that week. The airport manager was a short stereotypical country guy, also former Navy. He was not intimidated at all by the cops trying to close his airport. When he showed up I was about to go out with a student who was pre-flighting for a cross country. There were about 5 cops in the lobby, me with my flight bag, the airport manager, and a mechanic. One of the cops saw my flight bag and said, "I don't know why you have that, or why he's out of the plane. You aren't going anywhere." The moment he finished his sentence the airport manager said, "It's one runway that's closed. The airport is still open." This pissed off the cops. I was about to head out the door, and one of the officers said he was driving out to the disabled plane. I don't know why. The pilot had been gone for about an hour. The mechanic said, "You need to be careful," and the cop quickly retorted, "And why the hell is that?" And he said, "Because this is still an airport, and the first thing that hits you is going to be a propeller." A few seconds later a plane took off as one of the cars was approaching the runway intersection ironing at that point. I walked out, and as I was hopping in the plane with my student the same cop came up to me and said, "You aren't going anywhere. We're locking this down." I looked at the airport manager who followed all of us out to the ramp. He said, "Have a nice flight, Ajax boo." You could see these cops just fuming that they didn't have the authority to close down an entire airport because one plane went off the runway. The airport had two runways. Where the disabled plane was located was probably a mile or so away from the open runway. Why they were making a big fuss, I don't know. The occupant was relatively uninjured. His wife was the worst thing he had to deal with that day. He told her he wasn't going to fly. We had a good flight, and I got to eat dinner that week. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I check their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. A co-worker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first class seat. We had this bitch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally he tells her she has to go back to her seat or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first class cabin. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking mess. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is freaked up, and the department manager, my name, was a total moron, and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know mess about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said, "And my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be in garbage. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a dick. He would insult everybody working there and forced us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built and they needed to pick a manager and assistant manager. Some random got manager, but I got assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day he was ordering the other cashiers around. Then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same mess around, he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said get the freak out, and the customers went, you can't say that. This isn't your theater, we are customers. Mall security guy promptly said, this is my mall, and I can do whatever the freak I want. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit, since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment/discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter, and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn.